Today we discuss the biggest crossover of the millennium. We take a look at Marvel vs. Capcom 2's massive 56-man roster, discuss the critically panned soundtrack, and brag about the Dreamcast being the best version. Also, what's this free Marvel vs. Capcom 2 movement? Let's take you for a ride on this episode of SEGA Talk.
SEGA Bits presents SEGA Talk, a podcast talking all things SEGA! With your hosts, George and Barry.
Look, it's a giant talking egg. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the master here. Say what?
Welcome to SEGA Talk number 79. I'm your host, George, and with me, like always, is Barry.
That was my intro music.
I thought you were gonna be like, so like, this episode we're obviously gonna be talking about one of the biggest games of the 2000s, probably one of the most popular games of the 2000s, at least for me growing up. I don't know about you, but if you had to take a side in this war, whose side would you be on, like Capcom or Marvel's?
Now, Marvel.
Yeah, now for sure, right? It's an easy one.
Right.
But Capcom was pretty slick back then. Like, I think this is probably the biggest era for their fighting games, was because it had like Street Fighter 3, they had the Marvel vs. Capcom 2, they had Capcom vs. SNK 2. So they were popping off back in the day. I don't think this game really needs an introduction because I think everyone knows this game, but we're going to be talking about Marvel vs. Capcom 2, New Age of Heroes, which is a crossover fighting game published and developed by Capcom and is actually the fourth entry in the franchise. The game is obviously known for its crazy anime-style combo system, tag system, crazy broken gameplay, and a huge roster of characters featuring some famous characters and even some of the biggest weirdos from Capcom and Marvel Universe. So, Barry, tell us and the people online your history with this game, because I mean, your general impressions, because like this was a pretty big game for Capcom and Sega at the time, because it was like mainly advertised for Dreamcast, right? So,
Yeah. This is a game, the original one and the sequel on Dreamcast were ones I would rent from time to time, but I went over to my library and looked and I didn't see it there, so I guess I've never actually owned it, which surprises me. I honestly thought I owned at least Marvel vs. Capcom, the first one. I do have Capcom vs. SNK Millennium Fight 2000, but I don't own these ones. I do have them on like digital services. I think it was on Xbox 360 at one point.
Ooh, yeah, at one point. Which we'll talk about.
And I'm not surprised that it has a cult following. I wouldn't even be so sure if it is like a cult. It might just be like an actual full-blown following. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
but
you seem to love it. You picked it. This is not a Patreon pick.
No, I picked it because, like, growing up, like, in my neighborhood, like, when you go to the arcades locally, they would always have Marvel vs. Capcom games. Like, one of them, it was the Gym Fighter one with just Marvel. It was just, like, they randomly, I don't know, they were just so popular that they ended up in, like, these little stores where I lived. Mm-hmm. But, so I was totally new about Marvel vs. Capcom. I really liked the arts, the style, but, like, I was always getting beat when I was a kid. Every time I would go to the arcade, some guy would just come and beat me. And it's like, because I used to play, like, Street Fighter 2. But this is totally different than Street Fighter 2. You can't even have the same thought process as, like, blocking or even, like, play defensive. This is, like, try to go in there and do the craziest combo and take the most damage game. And, so when 2 came out, I remember I was super hyped when I read the magazine articles, especially considering I was already like a Dreamcast fanboy. I owned one. So any game that would give me the advantage at school to talk trash about the upcoming PS2, I'd be like, well, this game is this franchise is coming to the Dreamcast, right? It has 56 characters. It's the biggest ever, and you don't have to. And it was going to be arcade perfect, which was the hype back then. So definitely it was one of my biggest games that I had to purchase. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about development of the game. Well, we will most likely cover... Well, we're going to be talking about some of the past games that they did, because we're going to be talking about how they got the Marvel license. Obviously, if listeners didn't know, Capcom actually had, at this point, a relationship with Marvel for almost a decade. The first game Capcom created for Marvel was 1993's beat 'em up The Punisher, that actually got a port on the Sega Genesis. Did you ever play the Genesis Punisher game?
I did not. It was hard to know back then, like, when they'd be good and when they'd be bad. So at one point, I just kind of like ignored them.
That's exactly. Actually, at this point, Marvel had this whole thing where we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, I definitely didn't beat 'em up. Play it when it's a beat 'em up, but I didn't play it when it came out. I do remember playing it like on an emulator randomly. I thought it was kind of just whatever. It's nothing like. It's not a great game, but that's just kind of how these beat 'em up games used to be back in the day. They would come out a dime a dozen. So right now, it might not seem that way, because right now it seems like the Marvel license is hard to get right now, but because of the big success of the Marvel movies. But back then, Marvel was slutting out this franchise really badly. Like, they had multiple publishers doing multiple Spider-Man games and all this. Like, for example, Acclaim and Sega were doing Spider-Man, and Sega and Konami were both doing X-Men titles at the same time. There's a huge list of games. Do you remember these like early 90s Marvel games, and are there any of these games that you actually liked? Like, there's a lot of games that you look at the history dating all the way from 1982. If you see the link I put on the notes.
Yeah, no, I'm digging through it right now. I remember enjoying the Spider-Man games. I don't believe I owned any, but now I do. I actually just recently got Maximum Carnage. I might actually own Marvel vs. Capcom on Dreamcast. I actually have this app. It's called Game Vault. And I opened it, and it says... It says it's in my library. So it must be over there. It kind of concerns me now, because I'm like, if it says it's in my library, but it's not over there, something happened to it. What happened to it? So, yeah, but no, there's a ton of them. I remember the X-Men games. Nothing really like stands out to me, though, except for maybe the Spider-Man 32X game, just because I've wanted to own it, and I just never got around to it, and now it's like, I guess, super rare. Yeah, but
I definitely remember like X-Men and X-Men 2 Clone Wars, because they had like the sickest covers of all time, and then you buy it, and it's not the greatest game in the world, but it was pretty sick at the time to be able to play like the cartoon version of X-Men as a beat 'em up game at home. That was pretty slick. Right. But yeah, and then the Incredible Hulk had like weird graphics where everything was super shiny. I remember that. Like, it was like wannabe like Donkey Kong Country graphics. Yeah. So there was some games they had going. I don't think they actually got pretty big until, at least in my opinion, Marvel vs. Capcom. I think that's what made it really like stand out. To be honest, at this point in time, there were a lot of X-Men and Marvel type games, and during the mid-90s, Street Fighter was probably the hottest game on the market. The artist behind the Marvel games at Capcom, who credits himself as Akiman, is that how you would say his name? Akiman, went to Twitter back in 2020 to talk about the development of the Marvel vs. series, or at least what he remembers. According to him, he was called into the arcade division at Capcom, and he was told, and the boss told him, "I can get you the X-Men/Marvel license. What do you think?" But according to the director of the game, Nishitani, he said that the reason they acquired the license was because Akiman, the artist, was a big fan and would always talk about how cool X-Men were and how they're popular in the United States, and that they were coming back to popularity in the 90s. You remember that, right? That they were coming.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The cartoon, and then led into the movies in the early 2000s.
Oh, yeah. Which led Capcom to acquiring the license to develop a fighting game starring X-Men characters. Acumen would also say that it was a business focus at the time. Jim Lee, they were saying that, like, yes, he liked X-Men, but at the time, Capcom actually saw a market for this game in the United States, so that's why they did it. It wasn't because he was a huge fan, even though that's what they say. That was the reason they looked into it. But at the time, Jim Lee's X-Men was breaking comic book sales records in the United States. That launched in 1991. Konami's X-Men video game was actually pretty popular in the arcades in 1992. And then they had the X-Men, the animated series, that also started in 1992. I would say if we talk to people that grew up in our era, they will say Jim Lee's X-Men is the classic X-Men they remember. Do you remember X-Men's popularity during this era where, like, they redid the X-Men, they had Jim Lee, they had those stories with, you know, the Sentinels, Apocalypse, and all these things they adapted early on?
Well, yeah, I mean, talking about it, you reminded me of it, but I was just going to say real quick, I do have the Capcom Design Works art book here.
Ooh.
And inside they do have art for Marvel vs. Capcom and Marvel vs. Capcom 2, as well as the games that precede it. But yeah, it's really cool to see this art, like, reimagined
in
the Capcom style.
Yes.
Yeah, because, I mean, they have a whole cast of Capcom characters who, as you can see from the cover of this book, if you're watching on video, they go together really well. But then if you were to throw in, like you're mentioning, the, like, Jim Lee X-Men, it's not exactly one-to-one. And so you really do need to redesign the entire, like, lineup of characters in order for them to fit in. But yeah, I always was a fan, kind of an outside fan of the X-Men. I really got into it with the cartoon series. I remember Pizza Hut, they gave away VHS tapes. They were silver and gold, like foil, and they came with trading cards. I remember the trading cards being really cool, and then I got into the movies. And I mean, to this day, I'd probably say the X-Men, like, movie series as a whole, despite there being, like, some of the worst superhero movies ever made in there, like, when they go good, like, they're really good. So I'm a huge fan of the X-Men movies as on a whole. I'm just kind of sad that they, like, New Mutants was the last one, and that was it. You know, it's like... And
I feel like the movies got so popular that it, like, actually changed the way the X-Men were for, like, a long time. I guess we'll talk about that later, because I do have a question about the comics and the change in the 2000s. But you're a big fan, so it's going to be interesting to talk about it. But I just want to... This is actually the weirdest part when I did the research, because Acumen, the artist that you were showing the artwork, is such a big X-Men fan that he was actually doing in-house translations for the X-Men and other Marvel comics in-house. He said that the work that he finished translating Fatal Attractions arc and the Thanos is now famous Infinite Gauntlet story. His translations actually got published in Japan under Marvel Cross. The animated series, it was actually aired in Japan and allegedly was funded and published by Capcom to promote the video game. So...
Interesting.
Capcom in-house was actually translating actual Marvel stories so Japanese audiences could understand the story behind it. And they were also publishing the cartoon. Have you ever heard of another publisher that would take this much time and effort to take the source material and, like, put it in Japan? Like, I've never seen like the Die Hard movies get a SEGA release. You know what I mean?
Well, no, I mean, not on this level. But, like, in the case of Die Hard, obviously it's being translated by the I think Fox was the distributor, so they are doing their own work. But it is interesting to see them do that level of effort. I guess the closest thing I could say now is that, like, when Sega brings over a game here that's maybe like 3 games in, or it crosses over with something, the social team will make, like, videos and make articles and try to, like, get fans up to speed so that they're not going in blind. Because, I mean, you and I know full well that in the early 2010s, Sega would, like, bring stuff over, but they wouldn't give any context. They'd just, like, drop it on us, and we're like, what the hell is this? You know?
Oh, yeah.
But now they, like, handhold. They're like, Lost Judgment is coming out. It's a sequel to Judgment. And you're like, okay. And then there's like another video, and it'll be like, here are the voice actors. They speak Japanese. But there's English ones, too. And you're like, okay. And I think it's... I mean... Well, yeah, but I think it's cool that they do that. And this is like doing it to the extreme, because you're like, oh, here's Marvel versus Capcom. What's Marvel? You know?
Oh, yeah. Especially
we'll tell you.
In Japan, like in the 90s with no internet, like... To us, it was obviously like, oh, we know what the X-Men are. We have a long history with the X-Men. But in Japan, I never thought about it. It'd be like bringing, like, I don't know, Berserk over and then having, like, a AAA game in America, but we never even knew the comic existed and it was never printed over here.
Right, but that's what we forget about, because we're over here, there's all these, like, Japanese anime-obsessed kids who are like, I really want to go to Japan and be, like, covered in anime, and then you go over there and you meet Japanese kids and people who are probably like, oh, I like Star Wars, I like Marvel, you know. There's a reason why they had. There's a reason why I remember our when I showed the George Lucas like commercials from over there, and the fact that they do like conventions, like,
oh yeah,
you know, there's a huge fan base of like American otaku or whatever you'd call it, like fanboys.
I wonder if those otakus like think that everyone in America dresses like the Simpsons, like, you know what I mean? Because like there's like
weird... Rawhide Kobayashi.
Yes, yes. So now that we got the fun foundation for the Capcom and Marvel's early relationship, we can move on to December 1st, 1999. This is when Capcom finally announced the official sequel to Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Superheroes, which was developed exclusively on Sega's Naomi hardware. I don't know why I always think it's something totally different. Which during this time was big, because this is actually the first Capcom fighting game that was not made on their own CP system 2 or 3 hardware. This is also the first title to have 2D sprites with 3D backgrounds. Do you remember this? And
I do, yeah.
Yeah, what was your opinion on the 2D characters with the 3D backgrounds? Because, like, this is the first time, even though, you know, they were always kind of jaggy, right? Like, they were reusing these, like, sprites for so long and they were low resolution. To me, this is the first time I played a game and I'm like, holy crap, these fucking sprites need to be updated. Especially after playing, like, Guilty Gear on Dreamcast. They had higher resolution.
Right.
Like it just like the 3D background just made them like pop even more jaggy to me. Or it could also have been the Dreamcast's like better picture too. But what do you think?
Right. Yeah, there is that. I liked it. I thought it was innovative and a fun use of the hardware. It's honestly what I thought a lot of Saturn games would be like. And then when I played the Saturn, I'm like, oh, it's mostly, you know, failed attempts at 3D games. Why weren't you doing this on the Saturn?
That was surprising.
But I think it's cool. I think the Dreamcast was when a lot of developers really started to like embrace the 2D and not feel so pressured to make every single game 3D. So they're like, well, if we're gonna make a 2D game, let's kind of use these elements where we can. Like, you know, Sonic Mania, they would do stuff like that where they were like, oh, we're a 2D game, and then when you see 3D graphics, you're like, oh, whoa, this is insane. You know, it's cool though.
My only thing was like, oh man, this game would be so sick with like new sprites. It's never gonna happen because it has 56 sprites, right? It's like, who's gonna redo all these sprites? And it's gonna take $1 million, but yeah, it's still I still like the sprites. They're still really high quality in this game, even though they're lower resolution. But I'm a big fan of 2D backgrounds, so I'm always going to be a hater no matter what. So that's just how it's going to be. So Capcom also created a new system with points, which, as far as I recall, on the Dreamcast was also on the Dreamcast, but they kind of like changed it the way it worked. But the idea was supposed to be that all these versions were going to work with each other, and there was going to be like endpoints, which you earn by going to the arcade. So you would earn your own points for arcade, and then you would earn D points on the Dreamcast, and then you would earn V points by playing online. Obviously, there was no online version for it in America, so obviously this whole thing was scrapped. But there was a match service for the Japanese version of the game, which with the help of KDD Corp, was using data on demand as a foundation that offered a whopping below 60 milliseconds of, I guess, lag or lag-free gameplay. This feature was removed from the future games and international ports, so we never got an actual online version on Dreamcast. But the way that the match service worked basically was that you had to dial directly to another Dreamcast. There wasn't a lobby. There wasn't like random matchmaking. You had to know the Dreamcast owner. So it was like kind of like the old Sega Saturn online gameplay where you had to know the number or whatever, and you had to dial directly and be on at the same time or whatever. Probably not at the same time, but well, I guess you have to be on at the same time, right, to play online. What's your opinion on the idea of Capcom's point system, which were scrapped with having arcade and online and Dreamcast offline being their own points? And what was your opinion of them not doing online? I think everyone agrees, like, this game would have been blockbuster back in the day online, right?
Right, yeah, no, I think it's an interesting point system. I think having 3 tiers is too much. I think, honestly, just have one type of point. I don't know why you need to differentiate. Maybe say, like if you want to push people to go to arcades, still say that if you go to arcades, you get double the points or triple the points. Or maybe there's a way that your Dreamcast points when you go and play in arcades get doubled. So that when you're playing at arcades, you don't have any points. But if you have the Dreamcast version, then you start racking up points at the arcade. You know what I mean? Like something like that to like... I don't really know what Capcom's push was at the time, if they wanted people to both go to arcades and play on the Dreamcast. I know... with F-Zero, GX, and AX, their big push was to kind of do a little crossover and have like unlockable content. They could have done something like that. As for lack of online, now that's just like you don't do that. Actually, on our Swing and Report show that I did with Big Elk on the Dreamcast anniversary, he was bringing up like, what's the deal with the sports games, basically, because he came late to Dreamcast, so it was like, to him, it was like, these things are useless. And I had to point out to him that, like, at the time, they were hot shit. But the thing is, with sports games, especially the online ones, is that once the newer versions come out, people aren't going online to play NFL 2K1 when NFL 2K, 4 is out. You know what I mean? Oh, yeah. So it's not just the roster, but it's also, like, where the community is. So yeah, sports games, they can come out, be hot, and then just like fizzle out as soon as the new hot game comes out. Whereas with these, there's more of a shelf life. But as we also learned when we did our Sega Talk Xbox one, we looked at those SegaNet notes. Remember, they were like, Sega told Microsoft, you don't need to have a ton of games. You can just have one big one and focus on it. That's fine. Because they were saying that's what we did with PSO, and they learned that you can make a lot of money. So maybe here this was not Sega of America kind of applying that. They're like, well, we could put every Capcom game online, but then we would be doing a lot more work than just one MMO. So,
and we'll get into the other versions of the game, and we'll talk about that thing. It's a very interesting thing with the online on that game, because there was moments where they could have done it and they never did, Mm-hmm. But let's talk about the gameplay on Capcom Marvel vs. Capcom. The game actually changed quite a bit when it comes to gameplay. New players could select a team of 3 characters to tag in and out, compared to the only 2 in the first game. The tag system is still part of Capcom's, where they like to call it the variable system, which basically allowed a user to tag in a partner at any point, even during a combo, during anything, basically, almost. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 also used Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighters variable assist, which allowed an off-screen partner to come in and perform a special move, which I've seen some crazy things people do with this game. Like, they'll bring in a partner, they'll do a combo, tag in, finish the combo, tag another guy in, and then get an assist to keep them in the air, and then continue the combo so they can never land on the ground. It's just man, you guys are Blockbuster, man. You guys know what you guys are doing. Anyway, obviously,
Right.
Marvel vs. Capcom 2 isn't like anything previous in Street Fighter games and during the era. Did you understand all these mechanics and like being able to chain them and like what you could get away with growing up? Because to me, I was like, when I started seeing like professional players play, I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. That's what I noticed. Yeah.
No, I'm completely oblivious to that. Honestly, if we didn't do these podcasts, I probably think all fighting games play exactly the same. I'm just, yeah, I am, to me, it's like a foreign concept that I can wrap my head around a little bit, but when I see people playing or when I'm playing myself, I'm like, I just hit buttons, you know. I think Virtua Fighter is really the only fighting game where I have strategy, some level of strategy. But like you said, with these, like I'm watching people switch in, switch out, switch in, switch out. It's like,
bro,
I'm done.
How can you think this fast? That's like what I'm saying. Like I'm showing like right now in the background. If you guys are watching the video, we're watching Justin Wong's best moments, who is considered one of the best players to play the game. He plays it professionally. He still streams this game, by the way, on Dreamcast. He refuses to play any other version. He says the Dreamcast is the best one, obviously.
Right.
This actually opens the game up to do crazy as hell combos, especially considering that the Marvel vs. Capcom series already kind of has easy to chain combos. Like they only had four face buttons, right? It was like light hit, light kick, hard hit. And you could just basically hit like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, you know. They weren't super hard, but like chaining them to be these long things that take massive damage, and a little bit of skill comes in, right? Actually, this game actually succeeded a lot of other games coming out in this era, especially when it comes to tournament play. It was actually at EVO 2020. Can you believe that? Literally last year. It was featured as an open tournament on Dreamcast, the Dreamcast version. So people last year were still playing high caliber Marvel vs. Capcom 2. While today's companies spend a lot of money updating fighting games to balance them out, the Dreamcast version of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 came out 20 years ago without an update and still has a cult following in the FGC. Are you surprised? And like, is it okay to have some games that are super broken? Like, I feel like sometimes these people love these broken games. It's like, I don't know, like Capcom. Everyone knows Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is broken, yet everyone wants to play it professionally and everyone wants to like get good at it.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess games at that era, when they released, and that was it. So it wasn't so much that they were... I guess to say it was broken implies that it can be fixed. You know what I mean? And if no one's fixing games, then the game is really not broken. It just is what it is, which is such a weird way to go about games. I mean, you know, if you're younger listening to this, or if you've just been playing games since like the PS3, I have news for you. Like, what was on the disc or the cartridge was the game. There was no add-on. There was no like updates. The game lived on the disc. Your save file lived on the memory card, and that was about it. It was... I mean, they would roll out revisions, like Sonic 1 had revisions, but they didn't advertise it. They weren't like, hey guys, we're really sorry, the clouds move in this cartridge, so why don't you run out, buy a new cartridge, and the clouds will move appropriately.
The closest they did was like re-release the game and then charge you $60 for it, like with the updated stuff. So
right, but they didn't really tell you that most of the time. They'd be like, oh, this is like Virtua Fighter 4 did it, right, on the PS2, but it was more just like, oh, it's a budget release, so you save some money and you get some bonus stuff. But when you play the game, you're like, oh, it plays a little differently. It feels a little more refined, you know. But they never would put out an email saying, hey, here's all the patches. They do that now.
Maybe they do, but like when I was a kid, like I think you're right. Like I never knew, like, oh, if I buy Super Street Fighter 2, it's Street Fighter 2, but like updated. Like it's more like what do they say? Like balanced. I didn't know that. Like I just bought it because I was like, oh, they got new characters. That's why I didn't buy it because.
And that's how they sold them. Because now on social media, you'll have like the Sega or Sonic account being like, hey guys, there's a patch coming out tomorrow. Here are the fixes. And I think back in the day, like that would be taboo because it would be like admitting your game has problems.
Oh, yeah.
Which I don't think anyone wants to do. They don't want to be like... But nowadays, it's like, it's a good thing because you're like, it's all that shit you've been hearing online, it's not valid anymore. You know, like if you see anything dated before today, ignore it because the game you're playing is this. But you couldn't do that at the time. It was kind of like, we're selling games and we still have games on the shelf. That's the old revision. So the last thing they're going to do is say, hey, if you see Virtua Fighter 4 non-platinum or non-like best of release, that's a shit one. Don't buy it. Like, they're not going to say that. You know?
Different time.
It was a different world. Yeah.
The other modes in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 included Versus, Training, Score Attack, which was similar to arcade mode, but this time you would get a high score by surviving. Oh, I actually skipped the other stuff, but okay, arcade mode. In this one, it didn't have character-specific endings. No matter how you beat the game or what team you beat, you got the same ending. This is like the stark difference between this and other Capcom fighting games. Like, I remember like rival schools, you would get specific endings depending on who your team was. So if you had like one of the characters and a different character, they would have their own ending. But if you had that same first character and then like it's a different second character, it would be a different ending, I would assume. But did you ever beat arcade mode in Capcom games just to see the ending of a character's story? Like, you ever see a character and you're like, what's Blanca's ending? I need to know. I need to know.
I would for Powerstone.
Yeah.
Because I remember each character in the original Powerstone, I believe they had like an ending. They had like a...
Yeah.
It wasn't so much an ending as like a image, right? Like that kind of resolved their story. And, you know, I guess since we're talking Capcom, that Powerstone vinyl and cassette tape was announced from Ship to Shore Media, so that's really cool.
Sold out, I heard.
What are your quick thoughts on that? Are you excited for that?
Yeah, I am, actually. It's finally time that we got a Powerstone something release, you know what I mean? How long has it been that we got a physical...
it did sell out.
Yeah,
I already bought
out.
it. That's awesome.
I didn't. My brother bought it, though. Can you believe that? So he has it, but I don't.
I will say Ship to Shore puts stuff back into print. They are not like a limited run company, so you'll see it back.
Okay, I'll just look for it, because I'm getting it for sure. I'm excited about that. As far as games, like, one thing I used to do a lot, you know, offline was try to beat these games for the ending. Like, I would always do it in Street Fighter 2. I almost beat everyone as a kid. Like, that's pretty hard because that game was so cheap, you know. When you get to the last boss, they just cheap you out so bad that, like, I remember that's probably the most I've ever yelled at my TV as a kid. Like, you're like, come on, this is cheap. Are you serious? Especially Street Fighter Alpha 1. Like, that game almost made me give up on, like, living. Like, I'm like, this is not worth it. But anyway, this game, obviously, I wish they had different stories for different people. They weren't huge stories,
right.
But I just enjoyed them growing up. So nostalgically, I would have loved it. But so, like we said, other modes included Versus, Training, Score Attack, which was like arcade mode, but you survived the longest, gathering points the longer you survived in these matches. The arcade version, like I mentioned before, has an experience system that to get hidden character. They had it, but they replaced it with this thing called the Secret Factor, which is basically, in my opinion, the same. It was like EXP points that you unlock hidden characters in the submenu and stage backgrounds and color schemes. If you were high IQ, like me and my friends, you would actually just download save files from Planet Web. I don't know if you guys did that, because I did that. Because like one time, what do you think about Marvel vs. Capcom 2 being a little plain when it comes to extras? And also, do you remember this point system, and what was your strategy to unlock everything? Because like me and my friend found out that you could just leave it on.
You have one.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying. Sorry, go on.
No. I mean, as far as extras, I was kind of spoiled with like the Power Stone games, especially 2, where they had that amazing like item shop where you could fuse items together. You could like make a baseball card and a beehive and like combine them, and it's like you got a sandwich, and you're like, oh, okay.
Right.
Like just crazy stuff like that, you know. And then this is a little vanilla, but it seems like you had fun with it. So I want to hear what's your strat? What's your game strat?
I hated the point system. I thought it was useless because it wasn't how good you did in the game. It was how much time you spent in the game. So when my friend told me this, he's like, dude, just leave the game. Before we had internet, you know? He's like, leave the game on. You can just unlock everything overnight. So I would just leave my Dreamcast on overnight. And then when I woke up, it would have a bunch of points. So that's what I did. But then we found out about Planet Web. So anytime we would lose our save file or somebody saved it over or we deleted it, we would just go to Planet Web and be like, who wants to play Capcom? You know, and then we just download the file and all the characters were unlocked. So in my opinion, it should have just been unlocked from the start. Because, like, if it's not based on, like, actually playing the game, you know what I mean? Like, if you do a combo, you unlock something. You know what I mean? Like how they do now achievements.
Right.
Yeah, that would have been sick if there was, like, missions like that. That it wasn't like that. It was just spending time on it. So leaving it online all night, you know, would do it basically for everyone. Let's talk about the characters. I mean, if anything makes this game what it is, it's the characters, right? Which was the biggest selling point for the game back in the day because it featured over 50 characters, and Capcom wasn't lying. It featured exactly 56 characters from both Marvel and Capcom. Technically, the game only had 4 exclusive characters, meaning they're not from other franchises, I guess. So, considering this is a Marvel vs. Capcom game, I don't think you want that many exclusive characters. Since Capcom, and also characters from other titles, it doesn't mean that Capcom didn't go in and actually change some of the characters. Like Dr. Doom actually was had more moves in this game, and Thanos was actually kind of gimped down because he was a boss character in the other one, and he was like too OP. Some new Marvel characters in the roster included Cable and Ananium less Wolverine, like without his like metal, so it's like it's still the same character. They just changed the shading, but all right. And Marrow, right. And also Felicia and Anacaris and Bonnie Hood from Darkstalkers got in, and Guile from Street Fighter Alpha 3 got in using that same model. Hayato from Star Gladiator, Jill Valentine, Tron Bonne, and the Surfbot from Mega Man Legends also made it in, which is kind of like one of the weirdest characters in these games, right? Right. Let's look at the 4 exclusive characters in this page. We have Ruby Hart, which is like the bad guy in this game in the story mode. She's like a pirate, and from what I read, she was supposed to be a character for a different game, and like they didn't use the sprites, so they just became Marvel vs. Capcom 2 character. Amanigo is like a Mexican cactus. Like this is the same thing. Remember we had Bean in Marvel vs. In Mega Mix, which is like a sombrero guy. I don't know. Like I feel like every time every time Japan's like Mexicans, sombrero. We got to add that. That's what their culture's about. It's like they read the book, like just the front page, you know. Sun 3, which is a little monkey girl, and Abyss, the last one, which is like the bad guy in the game, which is like this generic thing with horns, with like green neon horns.
Right.
So, what's your opinion on the weirdo characters that Capcom had lying around? Like, there's so many weird characters. Like, if you just look down the thing, it's like Captain Commando's in here. Like, I didn't even know what Captain Commando was. He had one arcade game in the 90s, right? I never played it.
Well, for the 4 exclusive ones, I think what's interesting is that, like, with Ruby Hart, it's a pirate as the lead, like, villain.
Yeah.
And in Powerstone, it was Kraken was the lead villain, who is also a pirate. And
Ruby Hart should have
Kraken
been in Powerstone.
Well, I feel like it was something going on at Capcom at the time where they're like, oh, the lead villain's a pirate. I don't know why. And I also think it's interesting that Sun is a like granddaughter of a character from a 1984 Capcom game. So I looked that up, and it's like, it's so cute. It looks like a little arcade, like, cute little game. You know, they look like Monster World characters. So it's so funny. It's like if Sega did a fighting game and then they're like, it's Pengo 3, you know, or something like that.
Redesigned?
Right, like complete redesign, lifted up to the like Virtua Fighter levels, but it's like the grandson of like Alex Kidd or something. Like it would just be bizarre. But yeah, as far as the roster, I think it's pretty cool. Yeah, I think Surfbot's funny in just how small it is. Does that mean it has a small hitbox?
Yeah.
Like, is it harder to hit?
It is kind of annoying to hit. It's funny because like I think some of the like sprites look really good, but then there's like these really weird ones. Like if you look up Roll from the Mega Man, it's like they didn't even put any effort into that one. Like there's some of these where you're looking at them and you're like, oh, I guess Roll isn't on this one. Maybe it's a different one I was looking at. The Surfbot is super small. I agree. Like they had some weird one. Oh yeah, here it is. Here's Roll. She looks so weird. She looks like a Genesis game model. It's weird compared to the other ones that are more fluid. They definitely had some of these.
Yeah, it's the black outline. It's like they're inconsistent. Some of the sprites don't really look like they're from the same game.
I will say that like
that is weird.
I really like that they use like Gorath from like Marvel Comics or the like Silver Samurai or Spiral. These are characters that don't really get a lot of play in the Marvel universe or in comics today. I don't think they're like big characters. So it's interesting. Thanos is being super fat and weird looking, like the old look of him. I think it's funny considering what he is now. You know, he's so popular now as a character.
Right.
Yeah. So that was interesting. So growing up, I always was a big fan of Capcom. I think they capture their own style, but this is really the Jim Lee era Marvel, like design wise. Like that's the Sabretooth they designed, that's the Psylocke they designed, that's the Omega Red they designed, that's the Juggernaut definitely that they designed. In terms of costume, but nowadays it seems that Marvel is more stuck in making the MCU movie stuff, like instead of comic related, because like if you watch the new What If series they did, it's like I thought it was going to be like based on the comics. You know how when you see like the DC animated, they're usually based on comics. In this one, they're
right.
Literally MCU characters with fake voice actors trying to sound like the actors, and like they're playing the performance of the movie characters in this What If universe. Back then, it was like they would be a lot more okay with using this is literally X-Men from the comics, right? So do you prefer that they're doing do you prefer that them focusing on the movie aspect of it since everyone knows about it, or do you like it when they were more, like letting people be comic characters?
I prefer the DC way of doing things. I really like that DC, despite me not really having watched them, DC has this like super deep animated universe, like a direct-to-DVD and streaming movie will come out, and people are like, oh my god, it's the continuation of the last, like, 20 years of animation. Like, that's huge. I think that's really cool. And then you look at the comics, and they've got... I don't know where DC's at right now with the comics, but is New 52 still a thing?
They did Rebirth, and right now they're doing... they're doing this thing called Infinite Frontier, and they're doing, like... basically... They're prepping up for another big event like they always do, but yeah, they're in that era.
Yeah, and then even with the movies, like Marvel would never do this, but like it's, I mean, on one hand, the MCU is like super big and like they've got control of it, and the movies come out, the movies make money, you move on. Like it's just kind of so funny how like something like Shang-Chi?
Yeah.
Will come out and people will be like, oh, it's great, it's awesome, moving on to the next movie. And then like Wonder Woman 84 will come out and people are like, holy crap, I hated this, let's talk about it, I'm gonna make 30 YouTube videos. And I'm like, to me it's like, would you rather go to the theaters and see a new Wonder Woman movie or like a forgettable I don't know, like it's weird to me. Like kind of like with the X-Men movies, like I'd rather see a bad X-Men movie that like takes chances than a cookie cutter movie that's just meant to like move the series along. You know what I mean? Like I feel like with the old Marvel movies, like around the X-Men era and the DC movies, like each movie is an event. It's not seen as a stepping stone for like some big epic story. And I kind of prefer that. You know, it's I like that more. I like the one-off with like little kind of things connecting them. Like with what did they do? Superman died in Batman versus Superman, and then the next two movies, there were like hints of Bruce Wayne trying to put the Justice League together, but it wasn't the focus. You know what I mean? Like at the end of Suicide Squad, he was just like talking to Amanda Waller, but that wasn't like that. You didn't require that. Whereas now you go see a Spider-Man movie and you're like, oh, we got Doctor Strange. Is this a Doctor Strange movie? You know, like I don't know.
I kind of
miss the.
Go on. Sorry.
No, I miss the day of going to see a Spider-Man movie, and it's like the Spider-Man comic universe. And I understand that the Marvel universe in the comics is bigger, but like, imagine that. Like the Raimi Spider-Man movie was the last time we really had like a compact trilogy, self-contained story where it wasn't like 30 other movies connected to it. Like the fact that I can't watch the Spider-Man movies on Disney Plus, but I can watch movies with Spider-Man in it on Disney Plus is weird to me. You know, it's just or Black Panther has had more cameos and other things than Black Panther movies. It's weird.
I don't even know if people even like understand that these are continuations sometimes, because like I'll talk to people and they're like, yeah, I watched The Mandalorian. Isn't it crazy that like Yoda's a baby and and I'm like, that's not Yoda. Wait. You think that's Yoda? Wait up. And so like some people are just, oh, I'm happy because I like the action. You know, like they'll go in there coming up with their own conclusions. Like that's Baby Yoda. That's Boba Fett. Right. Rescuing them from back in the time. And it's like, no, you got it all wrong, my dude. This takes place after 6.
Right, but then it also like, it kind of helps the studio because they make money regardless. You saw that with the original Suicide Squad when it came out. Like it was panned. A lot of fans hated it, but it made insane amounts of money. And it's because it wasn't just like the hardcore comic book fans going. It was like the NASCAR crowd and like the regular old family just going to see a movie because it was like, oh, it's got the Joker in it.
Pretty much. The Joker's
and they and like, to be quite honest, like I went to go see it and I was like, oh, that was fun, and I didn't really think about it afterwards, unlike some people who are just like getting having a brain aneurysm over like
having
I don't know, movies, the Joker having a grill.
Having bad movies, there's like an actual market for people that just hate movies. That's the best part, because you can make a lot of money hating on movies all day. So when you went and played Marvel vs. Capcom 2, what is your go-to team? Yep. Like, without even thinking about it, you're like, okay, I'm gonna have to select something. These are my banger characters that I select.
I would probably go with Spider-Man.
Sick.
And then probably a female character, because I always like to team them up. I can't really say, though. Maybe Storm. Storm and Spider-Man might be a good combo for me, just in the way I like to play. If that's possible.
Yeah, you can. It's a 3-character thing. You got to pick one more character we're going to be playing.
Oh, right. Probably like a big boy, like Sabretooth or something, like kind of round it out. I always like to take like the Golden Axe approach, where it's like male, female, and then big bulky guy. You know, something like that.
Mine was always like Ryu, because I played him in Street Fighter 2, so like I knew his bread and butter stuff. Wolverine, because he was so cool in the comics and he went ching ching and he had claws. And Cable, and mostly Cable because like he was so cheap. He had like that weird gun that takes up all the screen and you could just like literally just blast. And he annoyed a lot of people because a lot of people can't zone in this game that I played with. So definitely Cable, he's sick. Let's talk about the music, which this part of the whole my notes actually surprised me. The music for Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is now considered iconic to some people, I guess. One of the fighting game's most unique soundtracks, or one in the history of fighting games at least. I feel like Capcom's fighting game division at this time was really allowed to do anything they really wanted to on their games, including presentation. But believe it or not, the game for Marvel vs. Capcom 2 wasn't liked by everyone. The soundtrack was very jazz-inspired, and according to sites like IGN, was a quote, plain god-awful, and saying it was jazzy lounge lizard music and snappy beats that didn't fit with the tone of the game. Martin Taylor from Eurogamer continued his own hot take, saying that the game's great visual flair was let down by the, and I quote, a horrific, lift music-oriented soundtrack and low-quality sound effects. Game Revolution also stated that some of the lamest music you'll ever hear. I guess these guys did not want to go for a ride when it came to this game. Are you surprised that reviewers back then were so upset about the, I guess, soundtrack? I mean, the soundtrack was strange, let's be honest. When you first heard it, it was like, what the hell is this?
I am, and I'm not surprised, because I will see that a lot in like retro, like classic gaming magazines when I like page through them. Like, there will be these games with iconic soundtracks, and then they'll just say some backhanded remark about, you know, it's great except for the music. Like, I saw one, it was some magazine that was referring to a racing game soundtrack, and they're like, at least it's not, you know, unlistenable like Metropolis Street Racer. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Metropolis Street Racer has a fantastic soundtrack. So It's like, I don't know what these people expect. Maybe they wanted just like orchestral, like, you know, like, and that would work, but is that memorable? Is that unique? I don't know.
That's an interesting. I actually wonder what our audience would think, you know, like about the soundtrack now. Like,
right.
I always get it stuck in my head, so I don't know if it was bad back then. It was like, I found it weird because it was so like much vocals and like, and it wasn't what I expected it to be, but like it actually grew on me, you know, growing up with it. So more about the music. Back in 2009, after leaving Capcom, the composer for the soundtrack, Tetsuya Shibata, talked to VGM website called a video game music website called SquareEnixMusic.com about his historic soundtracks at Capcom. The only thing he really said about Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was when they asked him that Street Fighter Alpha 3 and this soundtrack were like the most controversial soundtracks he's ever created, he said, I agree with your opinion on Marvel vs. Capcom 2. It was free to compose in any genre, so I could easily make a change from previous installments. As for Street Fighter 03, there was some kind of limitation in terms of musical style, but according to him, he picked the musical style, and I guess he lives and dies by it. Fans have also been haters of the soundtrack. Here's a guide by Rocket Boy that lets you change the soundtrack from Marvel vs. Capcom 2, so you could burn a disc. Most people replace the soundtrack with this thing called Marvel vs. Capcom 2 Accurate Mix, which tries to change the sound effects and soundtrack to keep more up-tempo like the action. We have a video right here. If I'm going to play a little bit, tell me if you can hear it, so we can hear a little bit of the sound, what they got. It's like high beat techno.
Right.
So that kind of gives you an idea of this. So what's your opinion on people remixing game soundtracks and modding the original game because they hate the soundtrack so much? I've never seen this in other notes. Honestly, if anything, Sega does soundtracks right, so we don't have to see that. But would you ever do this?
Right, I think it's really bizarre. I almost think it's kind of insulting to the original composer to call it accurate mix, as though his was like incorrect or inaccurate. It's cool. I mean, it's fine. People can do it. It's cool. They're free to do it. But I wouldn't do it. It just seems like a waste of time for me. Like, the music is the music of the game, so get over it. I think some people can be incredibly entitled too and pretty mean. I remember just a few days ago, Tomoya Otani was posting on Twitter, responding to people who say that he just likes like synthesizers now.
Oh yeah.
And he was like, he said I use a variety of instruments, and it all depends on the setting in the game. And it's like, yeah, like, leave the dude alone. For one thing, like, he didn't take away music from like your game. He doubled the soundtrack of Sonic Colors. And it's, to my ears, I thought it sounded great, but it seems like people are like upset with him. It just, and I'm just waiting for the mod to come where they're like, oh, here's the accurate Sonic Colors accurate. You know,
I'm actually. We can't edit it though. Maybe the Steam version or whatever, the PC version will have the accurate mix. Maybe, which is like the old soundtrack, I guess, right?
Right.
Got
right.
you. Well,
yeah.
Capcom, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 actually had a lot of different versions. Obviously, we talked about the arcade and the Dreamcast version, which is the most popular versions in my opinion, because I don't really hear that many people talk about the Xbox and PS2 versions of the game. So let's talk first about the PS2 version of the game, which came out in 2002, 2 whole years after the Dreamcast version. Obviously, this game was, while the game was built on the Naomi SEGA arcade hardware, which basically a beefed up Dreamcast, the PS2 version was actually worse, obviously. According to people online that played it way higher, they know what they're doing and not me, right? High level play. Mm-hmm. They said that there's some glitches in the game and some of the combos don't mix. I think some people said they're like Sentinels, rocket power punch to fierce to 5 times super doesn't work. Like little things like that where you'd be like, oh, this worked on the Dreamcast and arcade, but not here. And let's be honest, that's like one of the biggest things that you want when you buy a home console version of an arcade game, is that even if the animations aren't good, even if it has slowdown, which the PS2 does apparently, and even if the graphics suck, you want the combos to be accurate to the arcade version, because one of the reasons people buy it is to try out their combos and learn how to play without spending a bunch of quarters. So that sucks.
Right.
And then the next year, it came out on the Xbox. People's biggest problems were basically no online. Neither of these versions have online, but I feel like people kind of shit on the Xbox version even more because Xbox Live was a thing and everyone had DSL modems at this point. Also, the same problems with the mechanics on the PS2 version. And they said that both of these versions have worse sound than the Dreamcast version. And considering that the Dreamcast version had a accurate remix, that means this is probably really bad in sound quality. Have you played these versions of Capcom versus Marvel or Marvel vs. Capcom 2?
No, not those versions, but I have a feeling we're going to be discussing the one I do own and have played.
We are. I haven't played these either, actually. And I was gonna look them up to see how much they cost. Yeah, they rare, no big deal. Capcom would announce the digital Xbox Live Arcade and PSN version of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 that was released in 2009, which was ported by Backbone Entertainment, who just got off porting Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix. The team actually used the original Dreamcast code as the base for the game, and they finally added online functionality to the game with the same netcode from the Street Fighter 2 port they did. The game also had different filters like smooth, crisp, and classic, and even added widescreen mode. Capcom seemed to know about the soundtrack controversy, and they even added a music volume control and a custom soundtrack. Capcom would release a free hip-hop mixtape to go with the game, so you could add it. Funny enough, there's a PlayStation blog post right here from 2009 that basically kind of mocks, saying, "Oh, we're sticking it to eBay. It's only $15, huh? What do you think, eBay?" Of course, the game would they would delist it in 2013, so I guess not too much stuck. I will look down in a little bit of. I'll show. Well, I guess I can show you the picture now. But there is a physical version of just the case. I don't know if you ever picked this up. That just basically had it was a Marvel vs. Capcom 2 case, and then when you bought it at GameStop, it's in the article, the PlayStation blog article. You can see it if you want to see a picture. But basically, it would be a case, and you would go to GameStop, and it was like limited run, and then you would pay $15, and then it came with the code, but with a physical case. Well, that case is rare. I own it. It's in my room somewhere. I picked it up because I heard about it. I woke up and it was on like Cheap Ass Gamer or something that they were doing it, and I called my local GameStop. I'm like, "You got the game?" I was gonna buy it anyway, digitally, and they're like, "Yeah, we have 2 copies of it." I got there. There's only one more left, and apparently they only got 2 per store or something like that. So I got lucky. I really like it. They also did this vinyl release. Let me see if I can show it because the blog is all screwy. They did this vinyl, the mixtape that they did for free. They did a vinyl version of it. That was also pretty rare. I wish I could get it. I don't have it, but I do have the case, which is cool. And so I have it digitally, and that's even rare. The digital version's rare. Come on, guys. You have the digital version, right?
For Xbox Live,
yeah, for Xbox Live, yeah. All right, cool. Because that's actually an issue because like nobody could buy it anymore because apparently Capcom said that they removed it from digital stores because of the Marvel license, which sucks. But I guess you could, Marvel does what Marvel does. We can't really.
Right.
First, let's talk about advertisement. This game actually did not have as much advertisement, even though it was like one of the top 10 selling Dreamcast games. The advertisement wasn't as big as like Shenmue or anything like that. But the first thing we do have here is a E3 trailer posted by Kiaji Dragon, who I've talked to on Twitter before, so I kind of wanted to give him a shout out his video. This is the E3 2000 trailer that was gotten from VHS. It's pretty as like the music, creepy music. So will it get you? This trailer reminds me of like the Sonic Adventure 2 one, like the music.
Yeah.
56 playable track.
Yeah.
It's like this is like the generic E3 music, right? So they're just showing you the characters and the graphics, which pretty sick.
Funny.
All the characters you could play. Like it's not super like detailed. Like now we have these like weird trailers that they spend months and months because it's the first time people will see the game. Back then it was like, all right, here's all the gameplay, just splice it together. But yeah, it looks great. This is what they would play in E3 2000 when you would go, I guess, and walk around.
Right.
Would this get you hyped for the game? And what covers this?
I mean, yeah. I think it looks pretty cool.
What covers this? That's not the cover for the US.
That's not the cover.
Yeah, man. What's up with this? I don't know this.
That's interesting. They would do that a lot, actually. The Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and then there was a Mega Man game that came out on PlayStation at the time, and Powerstone 2. The designer there was using the same template, basically. It was a green piece of art in the background. Like, they took a piece of art and, like, made it green, and then they put a character or two in front of it, and then the logo. They did this time and time again. It was so weird. Stupid. I
have two print ads. One of them is for the Dreamcast version that says 56 Incredible Legends, one incredible fighting game. Invincible Legends, sorry. And they used to have a 2-page spread for this because I remember it vividly from the Dreamcast magazine. But this is probably the ad they played the most or people saw the most in America because, I mean, magazines were still popular during this time period. And so you could just get away with a magazine ad like this. I think the brand name alone kind of sold this game, I think. It's just like 56 characters in one of the biggest battle games of all time. Yeah, of course people are going to buy it.
Oh, right, absolutely.
Also, I would say this is the arcade one because I don't see any console name, but the best of the best are back, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and then it has character profile art, which is beautiful artwork. Yeah, I mean, they all have the same scheme. It looked like blue was the big scheme for Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I think they're just fine ads. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think the Dreamcast one is nice. It gets you hooked. If you already know what the X-Men and Capcom are, you're in. So, yeah, I'm surprised it didn't have an actual TV ad. That's why I'm surprised.
That is surprising, like with like animation or like costumed actors or something. That would have been cool.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised because it's so popular. I was like, man, you thought they would. So let's close up the episode by talking about the legacy of the game. Like we said before, the legacy of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is huge, especially with tournament players in the scene. While Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is the fourth entry of the series, after the success of the title, we actually got Marvel vs. Capcom 3 in 2011 And then the disaster is Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite in 2017. There was also a Marvel vs. Capcom Origins, but that was kind of like a re-release of 2 games in 2012, which was like a compilation of Marvel superheroes and Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Superheroes. And even though in Wikipedia they have it as its own entry, like a game, it's just 2 games in one, so I don't consider that an actual game entry. Have you played any of these future versus games, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 or Infinite? And what is your general opinion of the change in style, since this is the last time we had these 2D sprites? Since, 3 and Infinite have their own style and models and stuff. So have you played the other ones?
I believe I've played 3 at one point, but to me it's all kind of forgettable, especially Infinite. I remember when that was revealed and I was like, is this going to be a big deal? And then no, it really wasn't. But yeah, it's just kind of surprising that this was kind of the end of the series in a sense, just in terms of like what people really truly loved about it. And I mean, I think it's time to go back and either maybe make a true sequel in 2D, maybe like Sonic for it, like Marvel vs. Capcom, like the true 3.
Oh,
do
yeah.
that. I don't know.
There's a lot of people that actually like Marvel vs. Capcom 3, like the style, they're fine with it. When it came out, man, I was so upset. I was like, wait, they're not going to do the 90s style that made it like super cool. Like I wanted them to do like Guilty Gear type, like high resolution, high animated sprites, but like mix around with some 3D effects and all that to like, add lighting and depth. They never did that. They kind of went their own style, and I was a little mad, but I kind of grew on me over time. The gameplay seems to be the closest to 2, I guess. All things considering. Infinite was just ugly, and I didn't like the fact that they were using movie models, and I'm like, nah, you're either going to go all the way and go comic or don't go all the way. So, whatever. I didn't buy Infinite, but I did buy 3, so Capcom got some money off of me. While Marvel vs. Capcom 2 has always been in high demand for re-release since 2013, one streamer, Maximilian Dude, has launched hashtag Free Marvel vs. Capcom 2. He started this on August 2nd of this year, and he did a video, which I'll play. It's only a minute. I'll play on his Twitter so we could understand the hashtag movement. This thing's gotten 21,000 retweets and 33,000 likes, so I will play it.
I would like to start a Twitter hashtag, which is hashtag free Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Free MVC2 from its imprisonment that it's been stuck in for the past 7 years of it being unreleased, unavailable, and unpurchasable. To get as many people to remind Digital Eclipse, Marvel and Capcom, how important Marvel vs. Capcom 2 actually is to you, much less the history of video games. How much do you love Marvel 2? And give them a reason to bring that back. I want to get as many Marvel vs. Capcom 2 fans, people that would be interested in buying a MVC2 re-release on modern day systems or PlayStation 4 or whatnot, Make it with functioning online, slightly better HD visuals, something that would at least allow us to enjoy the game together in the modern day. I'm going to ask for your guys' help to get this potentially a thing that'll get trending in some way to get Marvel vs. Capcom 2 back out of jail, where it's been stuck for way too damn long.
Marvel.
So, from what I gathered, obviously we could tell Max, like, why don't you play the Dreamcast version? It's still there, it's still good. But according to him, he's been trying. I saw his stream one time and he kind of talked about it. He said that he's been teaming up with Twitch to do these tournaments, right, where they're playing older games. They're fine playing King of Fighters and all this, right? But he wants to do a Marvel vs. Capcom 2 tournament. But Twitch, you can't play it online, right? So now with COVID, you have to do online play. There's no online version, except for the digital version, which you can't buy. So you have to have like a modded Xbox 360 or have modded back in the day.
Right.
And you can't have modded consoles when you play online, and definitely not with Twitch being a sponsor. They're not going to be like, oh, this guy played a model, Max is telling people to pirate the game and go hack their consoles so they could play a tournament that we are sponsoring. Not going to happen. So the only way for him to get these tournaments and the game going again and kind of do a revive of it would be to release it again with online play on Xbox Series X, PS5 and all these consoles, right? So, what you think it's time now for re-release? Maybe, Mark. You think maybe Disney should take the foot off the brake a little bit, stop being so stingy when it comes to this? Because that Guardians of the Galaxy game looks like shit. So I don't know what they're doing.
It's interesting because Disney is very open to Lucasfilm or LucasArts re-releasing their classic games. I mean, I think just about every classic LucasArts game has seen a re-release under Disney, so it's kind of surprising that the way Marvel's been functioning is it's like, no, we don't want to remember the old stuff, we just want to put out epic 3D money-making games again and again and again. And it's like, yeah, you can do that, and you can also make money on classic games. Now, things could change because Disney has a new CEO. His name, I believe, is Bob Chapek. And his big thing is to make like money in as many areas as possible. And there's already been a shift in DVDs. So about a year and a half ago, they were like, no more classic Disney movies are going to see like a 4K release. You're not going to see that anymore on disc. And then in the last few months, they've been announcing like Roger Rabbit and some other classic movies. And then on top of that, like Disney's been releasing a bunch of classic movies to Blu-ray through their movie club. So I really feel like there's probably a shift in culture. So maybe once COVID kind of goes away, we'll start seeing more, decisions being made about stuff like Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which is very niche when it comes to the grand scheme of like everything that Disney owns. So it's good that Maximilian is doing this. I think it will catch the attention because end of the day, if the money you put into bringing this out is minimal and they know they're going to sell copies, then why not? Like, do the limited run games thing. It's very clear that Lucasfilm is fine with doing it with them, so why should Marvel not have a problem? And they
re-released Lion King and like other games.
Right.
It's
what
do you like?
Aladdin.
I never heard anyone go, we need Aladdin right now for tournament play. It's like, come on, guys. People want Marvel's Capcom.
That was a really surprising release because that's the kind of release where I'm like, I love seeing it, but even I'm like, why did you do this? What a waste of time. Yeah. Like, it's cool. It's really awesome to have them again, but like, why would a company be like, let's make an Aladdin and Lion King compilation of the Genesis and Game Boy games, and then on top of that put in like hours of special features? It was like it almost felt like it didn't happen in the last few years. It feels like something you'd see release on Xbox Live in like 2013. Like it just did. It felt so out of place.
I was gonna say, is there like any like early '90s like franchised games that like you're like, I would kill right now to be able to buy digitally or in a physical copy on the modern console?
I would go all out for a Cool Spot re-release.
Wow,
I'd be on board for that.
I thought you were going to say The Simpsons, the arcade game, which I think they did for a while.
That would be cool. Yeah, but that came back already as one of those mini arcade machines.
You have to buy a 1-Up arcade. Can you imagine, bro? I don't know. I don't have room for a 1-Up arcade, but
I'm holding off. I keep seeing them, and I'm like, Star Wars, Simpsons. Like, I should be getting these, but if they do a Sonic the Fighters one,
you have to, right?
I will get it.
Yeah, I mean, it would look so sick.
It'll go right there behind me.
Yeah, it looks so sick
in front of the Wreck-It Ralph machine.
They have the Outrun run, but like you want the real deluxe arcade cabinet. You don't want the like fake.
Will it hold me?
That's what I'm saying. I'm like,
can the Outrun thing hold an adult?
The deluxe one, the real one, or the The 1-Up one.
The arcade 1-Up. It looks like it's made of plywood.
Yeah.
Like, isn't it going to break?
I don't know. I saw like a really skinny woman using it on the trailer, and I'm like, nope, that ain't for me. That's for sure.
Skinny women don't play Outrun.
Yeah, they don't. She wasn't playing. It was obviously the video was playing. It was CGI. But I would say also the TMNT games I think were pretty big for me growing up. So I would definitely want to see the Konami stuff. Them do more with that would be sick.
But we got that, at the very least, we have that new one coming out from, what is it, .emu or whatever?
Yeah.
No, it's from...
It looks really good, yeah. And T. Lopes is doing the soundtrack, so that should be interesting to...
Right, so we'll most likely see a limited run games like Ultra release where it'll be like tons of Ninja Turtles stuff. It'll be so cool.
Okay,
I'm
pretty excited for that. Do we have any Patreon comments in this thing?
We do, actually. If we're closing the show out, if you are a Patreon patron at any level, we will read your memories at the end of the show. This week we have 2 of them. The first one is from Nicholas Schaefer. He has to say, wow, this is such an amazing game. It started my love of fighting games. Any game where you can play as Mega Man versus Iron Man is a guaranteed fun time.
Damn right.
As a kid, I was always a DC Comics guy, but outside of Spider-Man, knew nothing about Marvel, but this game put Marvel on the map for me. In addition to the web slinger, I fell in love with Iron Man and Doctor Doom. People say nobody knew who Iron Man was before the MCU, but for me it was Marvel vs. Capcom 2 that put him front and center as my favorite Marvel hero. On the Capcom front, well before this game I wasn't really aware of publishers. There was Nintendo and there was SEGA, and that's how I saw games, and this game made me aware that Mega Man was a franchise I loved, was tied to other Capcom franchises that gave Street Fighter a try with Third Strike, and after having spent way too many quarters on this game in the arcade, I finally was able to get it for my Dreamcast in 2003, which is a dream come true, having one of my favorite arcades at home. Next up we have Alex Hugh, who says, I remember playing it at some golf place in Novi, Michigan during my senior year. I was pretty joyed when I encountered it so unexpectedly. Yeah, isn't that fun? Like, I have a memory of the Simpsons arcade game being at like a ski lodge, and so I'd only see it in the winter.
Oh, yeah, it's not, yeah.
So, so that, do you want to wrap it up?
That's it? That's the whole episode?
I guess that's it, yeah.
All right, then. Bye.
Bye.